Anybody have a dog? I used to have a dog. Cute little guy named Pablo. He could attack an ankle so ferociously without doing any damage. It was an amazing thing to see. What I loved about him is his playfulness. We used to play fetch all the time. Of course, I was getting the ball most of the time myself. But there was something I didn't like. Can we talk about fleas for a moment? Those two animals don't mix very well. Terrible creatures fleas are. But did you know, like dogs, fleas can be trained? Did you ever hear about the fleas in a jar experiment? The story goes like this. There was a scientist that wanted to study the jumping behavior of fleas. So what he did was he put some fleas in a jar with the lid on top. Of course, without the lid, the fleas would jump right out. And what he observed was that the fleas would jump up and hit themselves on the jar, on the lid, and drop back down. This would continue on. After a while, he noticed that the fleas would only jump up just below the lid. After a while, he removed that lid. And to his surprise, the fleas only jumped up to the rim of the jar. Even though they were well capable of jumping out of the jar, they learned from past experience that they wouldn't jump out of the jar. The same thing can happen to humans. Now, the theme for TEDx is brick by brick. And I thought it was ironic that I would be one of the speakers because my father was a builder. I mean, I can barely swing a hammer, let alone actually building something. But I suppose, in another sense, building our lives brick by brick is exactly what we do, isn't it? It sounds easy enough, but we find early on that finding the bricks we need and putting them the way we want is not that easy at all. One of the biggest hurdles we come across is that we put limitations on ourselves. Once we define what kind of limitations that we can put on ourselves, and we can see that, we can build beyond that and build ourselves to be better versions of ourselves. Sometimes our past experiences cause limits on ourselves. My parents originally came from Puerto Rico, and their financial situation was so difficult, they needed help from my aunt and uncle to raise me. They wanted to make sure that their children didn't go through the same difficulties that they went through. So security and safety became parenting principles for both my parents and my aunt and uncle. Now, those principles can lead to limitations later on in life. I had to decide a lot of things in my life and make decisions to make sure that limitations weren't limiting me, from choosing the school I was going to go to making sure that I choose the right career, to my social interactions, to make sure that I was conducting myself the right way and not limiting myself so that I would live the right life I wanted to live. There was a child, we'll call him Max, and Max loved to do tricks. He could do spins, jumps, anything on his bike. But then Max's science teacher told him about gravity. Then the next time Max went out to do his tricks, he fell. He tried again, but then he fell again. What happened to Max? Was it gravity? Of course it wasn't. Gravity's always been there. It's Max's new limitation, or new awareness of gravity and what it was doing on his effects on his bike that was preventing him from doing what he needed to do. So what we could see that sometimes the limitations that come upon us come from well-intended sources in our lives. But sometimes those limitations come from within ourselves. On May 6, 1954, Roger Bannister ran the mile in 3 minutes and 59 seconds, thus becoming the first person to ever run the sub-mile, the mile in under 4 minutes. No person had ever been able to do that in the past 100 years. A month and a half later, another person ran the mile in 3 minutes and 58 seconds. A year later, 3 runners did it in one race. Prior to that, now there's been 1,800 people that have actually ran that race in that time. How can that be? Did something change in our planet? Not at all. Before, runners always thought that you couldn't run the mile in under 4 minutes. Once Roger Bannister did it, he showed that the possible is possible. The impossible is possible, and thus breaking that mental barrier. Now, I love playing sports, and I certainly love playing football for the high school football team of the Goshen Gladiators. I learned a lot from my experience with that. And one of the things I've learned is to put aside self-doubt and that I can accomplish whatever it is I wanted to do. Let me explain. My junior year, I was playing tailback in a game, and we scored a touchdown. The coach called for a 2-point conversion. I was supposed to get the handoff, run into the end zone, and get the points. Well, I got the handoff all right, but I didn't score. As I got to the sideline, coach called me over and said, "What happened?" I remembered vividly what happened next. Coach took me with his right hand on my shoulder and said, "The reason you didn't get in is because you didn't want it bad enough." That's interesting. I didn't want it bad enough. What he was telling me is that the defense didn't stop me from getting the end zone. I stopped me. Later on in the game, we scored another touchdown, and the coach called for a 2-point conversion again. And wouldn't you know, he called the same exact play. I got the handoff, and boom, 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 I was able to score. All I had to do was believe in myself, and that I know it's a team effort, but I had to be able to believe that I can get into my own. Later on in the season, a coach said something to me that has stuck with me all my life. Always strive for more than what is possible to reach. Later on that season, we won the league championship against a much bigger school. A huge victory for our small school. All we really needed to know is that we have to believe in ourselves, and once we do, we can accomplish anything. Anything is possible once you believe in it. But sometimes, overcoming limitations has more to do than just winning football games. I'm a certified financial planner, and it's my job to get people to get to their goals and live the lives they dream of. One of the things I take great pride in is to get people to retire earlier than they expected. Sometimes convincing someone that they can and should retire is an obstacle in and of itself. I remember talking to a client one day, and he asked me, "When can I retire?" Well, I said, "Based on your situation, you can retire now." He goes, "How does anybody retire before the age of 65? Now, I know he'd grown accustomed to not really like what he was doing anymore. And the only thing holding him back from retiring was the number in his head. Retirement is just a number. So we would have this conversation year after year, and he would ask me, "When can I retire?" Well, like we talked about before, you can retire now. What are you waiting for? Well, eventually he did retire. And boy, did he enjoy hanging out with his grandchildren. He would show me pictures all the time. Unfortunately, a year later, he passed away through a routine surgery that he had. Now, I'm glad that I was able to get him he was able to enjoy hanging out with his grandchildren, but I wish I was able to convince him that the only thing that holding him back to living the life he wanted to live was just his normal retirement number that was stuck in his head. I had my own epiphany about, a work-related epiphany, about limitations in the workplace. For some reason, at some point in my career, I believed that the amount of time I spent in the office would determine my success. So I ended up working many, many late nights. Now, I have 2 lovely daughters, Adrian and Morgan, and I remember coming home one day during the summer, and it was a beautiful summer day, and I asked them, "What did you do that day?" And they excitedly told me, "We did this or that." I don't really remember what they actually told me, but it sounded like a lot of fun, and something I probably would have had fun doing with them. And what I realized at that moment is that as important as it is to provide for my family, hanging out with my family, my daughters, was a treasure. So I decided to take a lot more time off during the summer. Screw that limitation of having to be in the office at all times. I'll never be able to hang out with my children and make up that time. Now, as toddlers, I tried very hard to not use the word no to them. What I would do is say things like, "What you're drawing there is very interesting, honey, but I'd rather you do your masterpieces somewhere else than on the walls." We hear the word no so much in our lives early on, it's no surprise that we have so many limitations that we put upon ourselves. Now, my daughters have grown up to be lovely young ladies, and Adrian she is an occupational therapist, and she wants to show me a business plan, and she wants to get into the Airbnb business. My other daughter, she just graduated from college. She wants to continue to travel the world as a travel nurse. I'm proud of both of them and I admire their ambitions. I want to make sure that they continue to pursue themselves in what their dreams are and not let self-limitations hold them back. My goal is that they would just pursue that and only do self-explorations of making sure they can do whatever they want. Now, isn't that what we're hearing from a lot of the speakers from TEDx? We all have limitations, but we can work to go beyond them. And once we do, we can make ourselves to have better lives that we want to live in. So what I'll say to you is, go ahead, take a chance, try something new. Like it says on a poster hanging in my daughter's bedroom, shoot for the moon. Even if you miss, you'll be amongst the stars. And I think that's great advice for all of us. Thank you.